Hi. I felt like I needed to come in dancing because I can't not dance to this song, but also because it just kind of makes life better when you do. Hi, hello and welcome to If You're Happy and You Know It, Take This Survey, the world's longest show title. Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Agnes Török, and I've been thinking a lot about happiness. And after I started thinking a lot about happiness, I started reading a lot about happiness. After I started reading a lot about happiness, I started studying happiness. And after I started studying happiness, I started researching happiness. After I started researching happiness, I started asking other people about how they thought about happiness and read about happiness and researched happiness. And I started asking other people what made them happy. And after I started asking other people what made them happy, I started writing a lot about happiness and I wrote this show. I've been thinking a lot about happiness. You might be able to tell. But the thing is, I think you have too. I think you've been thinking a lot about happiness as well, whatever that's looked like to you. And I invite you to take this hour to think about you, about your happiness, about your good times and your bad, your joys and your challenges. I invite you to take this hour to think about you, which means it's okay to zone out, which means it's okay to start kind of scribbling in your lap if you need to, which means it's okay to make this about you. I'll be up here talking, ignore me at any point if you like. I'm not offended. But I guess it felt only fair that since I'm going to be talking this whole time, that I at least start by introducing myself. Here are 6 things you didn't know about me. 1. My name is Agnes Török. The reason I have an impronounceable last name is because it's not a real last name. It's made up. It's a fake. I didn't make it up though, and it was for a good reason. It was my great-grandfather, you see. He was a Jewish intellectual in Hungary at a time when being a Jewish intellectual in Hungary wasn't great. At a time when being a Jewish intellectual in Hungary was likely to get you a one-way ticket to a concentration camp. This is probably not how you expected a show about happiness to start. Sorry about that. We'll get to that bit later. So my great-grandfather changed his Jewish last name. He changed it to one that would explain his dark eyes, his dark hair, his facial features, Török. Literally the Hungarian word for Turkish. The officials were so stupid that if you were really lucky and you changed your last name to the Hungarian word for Turkish, there was a chance that they would go Jewish. Oh no, he's Turkish, he's fine. And you would not be sent to concentration camps because of the idiocy of officials and a whole lot of luck. My great-grandfather survived and had a son. My grandfather fled from Soviet Hungary to Sweden, where he met a Swedish woman. And they had children. Their oldest child grew up and had a kid. That kid is me. If it wasn't for this made-up, impronounceable lie of a last name, I probably wouldn't be standing here today talking to you about happiness. 2, I have the world's worst sense of direction. I don't mean like, oh, I get lost sometimes. I mean, I have literally gotten lost on my own street more than once. It's a very short street. 3, this is not my first language, nor is it my first country, but they are the first where I don't mind feeling lost. 4, I didn't write this show because I know everything there is to know about happiness. I definitely don't. I wrote this show because I'm still trying to figure it out. And figuring it out to me looks like doing the research, looks like reading up, looks like studying. And for me, that's helped. For me, that's helped me through difficult times and helped me rejoice in the good times more. And I hope maybe, if I share some of that, maybe in some small way, it might help you too. 5, there are experiences of feeling good and feeling bad that I know something about, and I will tell you about. For example, I've had to cope with serious physical illness. For example, I've had to overcome physical disability. For example, I've had the joy of tasting chocolate cake. And I'll tell you about those things. But there are also experiences of feeling good and feeling bad that I haven't lived, and I won't pretend I have. I've never been diagnosed with depression. I've never found solace in praying. I've never tried to run a marathon. Some of you will have. Some of you will know all about that. Feel free to tell me after. Our journeys are going to look different, and that's part of what it is, to be this kind of human, happy condition that we're in. But I think that sometimes, by sharing our experiences, we can help each other. I think sometimes by making spaces where we talk about the things that feel good and the things that feel difficult in our lives, we can make things a little bit easier. 6, sometimes at the end of a poem, people do this thing with their hands in their faces. When they do this thing with their hands in their faces, it makes me feel good. When they do this thing with their hands in their faces, it makes me feel happy. When they do this thing with their hands in their faces, sometimes they react, they smile and they applaud. Sometimes at the end of a poem, people know to do this thing with their hands and their faces where they react and they smile and they applaud, and they know to do this thing with their hands and their faces when I take a step back and take a sip of water. Thank you. It would have been so incredibly awkward if you didn't applaud there. So thank you for going along with that. I'm going to be chatting a lot. On occasion, it would be great if you responded in some way so I know that not all of you are zoned out at once. That would be lovely. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming and leaving space to the people who came a little bit early and a little bit late. If there is somewhere to give space for the few people who are sitting on the side, try to do so. So we're going to talk about happiness for the next hour. We're going to talk about the ways in which happiness is personal, the ways in which happiness is social, and the ways in which happiness is political. At the end, I'm going to give you just one piece of advice. Just one. That's it. But I felt like because this is a scientific sort of show, that it would make sense if I started by summarizing the show in a Venn diagram. Because that's science, right? Just so you guys have a clue about what's coming up. So there'll be quite a bit of science, and in the intersection of science and stick figures, there's going to be some happiness. And I'm hoping that works for everyone. The stick figures are not so much because they're educational, but because I'm really crap at drawing, and I feel like it would add to your happiness to see that. So there's going to be some stick figures as well. I guess because I've introduced myself, I'd quite like to get to know you better as well. It feels only fair if we're to be learning a little bit about each other's happiness for the next hour that I get to know you a bit. So as researchers, we often do this thing where to get to know someone, we'll invite them out for a drink and we'll chat to them in a bar for a while, and we'll invite them over to our place and we'll do a survey with them So it's not a very natural way to get to know people, and I'm aware of that. But it's quite helpful with such wonderful large groups of people to see a sense of what you all think about happiness and what your experiences are. I'm not going to ask you to do anything weird. You're not going to have to say anything. At no point in the next hour are you going to have to share your most dark, intimate secrets. I'm not going to ask you questions that are difficult to answer or kinky in any way. I'm just going to ask you some questions about happiness. If a question or a statement is true for you, I'd like you to raise your hand. So let's try that out. Who here has so far been enjoying the Edinburgh Student Arts Festival? Lovely. Good start. They've done a great job. So let's try this out. Happiness Survey 101. Who here has ever felt happy? Who here has ever felt like they're not appreciating the good things enough? Who here has at some point felt overwhelmed by the bad things? Who here has felt even for a second like the bad things might outweigh the good? Who here has not known how to change things? Not just me then. Who here, when they think about the word happy, picture someone skydiving? Or a bunch of people in matching pastel-coloured shirts laughing together in a perfectly clean kitchen? Or a bunch of people jumping at the exact same time on a beach in a sunset? Or a beautiful, slim white woman laughing alone with a salad? I know I do. Who here, when they think about the word happy, pictures themselves? I never used to. You see, I'm only just now learning how. I am 23 years old when for the first time in my life I decided to spend a year figuring out what makes me happy and how I can do more of it. I'm only just now learning how to be happy. And you'd have thought this was an earlier lesson, but I'm only just now learning how to be happy. I've spent the majority of my life memorizing useless facts to regurgitate them on command at tests and then promptly forget all about them. But I'm only just now learning how to be happy. And in the end, I think this is stuff no one can teach us. We're going to have to teach ourselves. And I'm only just now learning how to be happy. I'm only just now learning how to be happy. And I hope you've started learning too. Thank you for that. So I've been thinking a lot about happiness. And I guess the first thing that I realized when I started thinking about happiness and reading happiness is stick figures. That happiness is personal. What I mean by that is that we can tell from the research that people think about happiness in radically different ways. Okay, some people think about happiness as this momentary euphoria, this climax of perfection. Other people think about happiness as this long-term, balanced, building up to contentment, something that could last a lifetime. Some people think about happiness as perfection, as the absence of anything difficult, anything negative in their lives. Other people think about happiness as the ability to deal with those negative things, the ability to cope with those difficulties, the ability to enjoy life's roller coaster ride, whether you're at peak or rock bottom. And it's not strange that if we think about happiness in all these different ways, that maybe the science of happiness has come up with a couple of different findings as well. There's been research into happiness by sociologists and social anthropologists and psychologists and economists, and they can even agree on what to call happiness, much less on what it is. They've been calling happiness human flourishing, or positive affect, or well-being, or the good life, or the ultimate good. That last one was Aristotle. This research has been going on a while now. But I feel like lately something's shifted. I feel like lately all these beautiful, diverse ideas about what is ultimately the meaning of our lives have been narrowing. Like, lately, something's been shifting in the way that we think about happiness. Today, products with the word happy in them are booming across the market. Today, happiness self-help books are the singularly quickest growing book genre. Today, there are apps for happiness. And that can be good. That can be helpful, but there's a risk. There's a risk that what that's doing is turning all these beautiful, diverse ideas about what is ultimately the meaning of our lives into one very narrow idea. One very singular idea, one very marketable idea, one very consumable idea. I call that idea happiness, capital H. Happy, happy, capital H. The new women's magazine. 45 tips for a hotter, trendier, sexier happiness. Is everyone else happier than you? We thought so. Take this quiz to find out today. Happy, happy, capital H. Happy, exclamation mark. The new best-selling self-help book. Now only $12.99 from Old National Bookstore near you. May lead to feelings of inadequacy, stress, and general unhappiness. Happy, happy, capital H. I happy, Mac happy. Happiness 2.0. I'd like to order a happy, please. Happy with a side of self-fulfillment and a large Coke. I'd like to order a happy, please. Happy with a side of personal achievement and perfect Facebook posts. I'd like to order a happy, please. Happy with a side of smug. Happy with a side of better than your average life and your dead-end job and your snot-faced kids and your underwhelming relationship. Happy with a side of your inability to meditate. Happy with a side of your failures, your inachievements, your failure to get up at 5:30 in the morning for a jog. That's not morning, it's a great night out. Happy as a medal. Happy as a success story. Happy as an achievement. Happy as if happiness belonged to Hollywood blockbusters and advertisement companies. Happy as if happiness did not belong to you. Why would we pursue a happiness that does not belong to us? As if our lives do not belong to us. As if the meaning of our lives is not defined by us. As if we didn't all have to go through the terrifying and amazing process of figuring out what actually makes us happy. As if happiness wasn't political. As if that political choice wasn't yours, as if you could buy happiness in a Coca-Cola can. While a lot of us tend to think about happiness as this sort of perfect, photogenic thing, this thing that shows up on Facebook feeds, when we look at the kinds of people who, on self-reported surveys, when asked the question, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10, the kinds of people who tend to score highly on that are not necessarily people who live perfect, glamorous lives. They're very often people who've had a very rough time and had to come out on the other side more appreciative of what they have, more grateful of what others take for granted. And I think that what that often teaches us is that happiness is not an equation. It's not a scale of 1 to 10. It's not a pile of good stuff and bad stuff to be measured against each other to see which one turns out on top. Happiness and unhappiness are not polar opposites. They're simultaneous experiences. On any given day, any given one of us will likely have something in our life that feels pretty good, that we're pretty happy about, that we're pretty grateful for, that's going pretty well, and we'll have something in our life that's pretty frustrating, it's pretty challenging, and that we'd like to be different in some way. And that's what normal life looks like. And so I don't always think it's helpful to think about happiness as the scale. I think sometimes we need to think about happiness in a different way. We need to think about happiness as a story. And if happiness is a story, then I think what that does is to teach us that happiness isn't just about the good times. It's also about how we deal with the difficulties. Because if we talk about how we deal with the difficulties, happiness is the way in which that we build resilience to cope with the negative times, the difficult times, the unexpected times. Because the difficult times are going to happen. Whatever they look like for us, whatever form and shape they take for us, all of us are going to have difficulties in our life. None of us will go through all of life without having a bit of a rough time. So when the shit hits the fan in our life, the best thing that we can have done to get through it in the best way possible is to build happiness every day as a form of resilience. And building happiness as daily resilience looks like taking care of ourselves. It looks like taking care of our physical health and our mental health. It looks like doing the kinds of things that we're unlikely to do when we're having a rough time, like eating properly and sleeping properly and moving occasionally. But it also looks like recognizing stick figures. That happiness is social. And what I mean by that is that our happiness is going to be affected by those around us. And those around us are going to have their happiness affected by us. And that also means recognizing that taking care of our daily happiness, building happiness as resilience, isn't just taking care of ourselves, it's also taking care of each other. It's taking care of our social relationships, taking care of our communities, taking care of our society, so that when the shit hits the fan in our life, there's someone to ask for help. There's a support network to rely on. Because all of us are going to need to ask for help, and when that day comes, it's about knowing that we dare to, and that there are people who will, without a second of a doubt, be there for us when we need it. That was not the kind of lesson that I learned from books. I wish it was the kind of lesson that I had learned from sitting in some beautiful sunny library on a Sunday afternoon reading a research report. It's not that kind of lesson. It's the kind of lesson that I learned from having a very rough time myself, from being very ill and stuck in hospital in a country that didn't feel like mine yet, and a language that didn't feel like mine yet, and feeling most alone when I most needed support, and getting support from the most unexpected of places. And that day I learned two things. Firstly, having a kidney infection, I learned that kidneys are really quite important. Take care of your kidneys, people. And secondly, I learned that happiness is not a one-person job. Neither is it ever finished. Happiness is a collaborative work in progress. We need other people for it, just like they need us. I learned this from people who are true happiness experts, not because they'd read the books, but because they'd lived it. This poem is for the women in a terminally ill ward of an Edinburgh hospital, who knew more about happiness than any scientist I've ever met. The old ladies in the hospital have got it all figured out. They crown you family when you were a stranger only a minute ago, and they talk about everything. All the good stuff, like how nice the nurses are for bringing extra toast at night and whose grandchild is meant to come for visiting hour today. They joke about everything. Well, I don't know what I ever did to that man Parkinson to have him give me his decease. Nothing is serious enough to take serious when death may be at the door. These beds have been rolled around more than once before, and I don't know who left or through what door for me to earn a place. But I know I no longer need to earn it, because the old ladies in the hospital have got it all figured out. When things get rough, you talk about the worries and the scaries, and you get through them. One smile, one compliment, and yeah, one cup of tea at a time. Ain't no each man for himself here. Ain't no survival of the fittest here. It's the survival of those most able to cooperate. The survival of those most able to care for more than themselves. It's the survival of us, collectively. What does it matter if I get better if you get worse? How could I be winning if we are losing? So it is with society, and so it is with Ward 210. Because the old ladies in the hospital have got it all figured out. When things get real rough, when things get real rough. When Jessie struggles to reach her straw only to get it stuck so far down her throat, she starts suffocating, and Nancy is too far away from her walker to reach her on time, when the rest of us have too many things hooked into our bloodstreams to move. When things get real rough, you call for help. Capital H. But when help's come and help's helped, you ask how help is doing today, because no one's life is easy. Did help get some rest after her shift last night? As her youngest stopped crying from the toothache, he listened to help too, because we're all in this together. And the old ladies in the hospital have got it all figured out, because they are fearless in the face of fear. Because they will literally hang their old laundry out in public and flash each other by opening their gowns daily. before they will feel shameful in the face of shame, because they put their hearts and minds and scars out in the open. You know you can trust them with your life. So what I was saying earlier is that there's a lot of research into happiness, and I think that some of it is a bit of a problematic thing because it only measures happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. And it doesn't ask any of the important questions about why happiness is there. If you ask someone, how happy are you today on a scale of 1 to 10? Or how content are you with your life on a scale of 1 to 10? How do we make sense of people who are terminally ill but who find joy every day? How do we make sense of people who are struggling but who find ways to be resilient? We don't. So I think a better way to think about happiness is to think about happiness as a story. If happiness is a story, then the amazing thing about that is that we have power in how we tell those stories. We have power in what we make the important chapters, the key characters, what kind of narrative journey we're bringing ourselves on. And if happiness is a story, it means that we can recognize that even if right now is hard, even if this chapter is bloody difficult, our story can be one of hope, one of positive change. We can be heading towards a good ending. And that can matter so much for how we perceive our day-to-day lives. One of my favorite poets, Shane Koizan, summarized this sentiment beautifully when he said that he felt sorry for people who said they couldn't be happier, like they reached the upper limit of their joy. And I think that if terminally ill women can find ways to find happiness and joy and friendship and strength and compassion every day, then you know what? Joy is pretty limitless. Some people say, I couldn't be happier, like they reached the upper limit of their joy. Like they aimed for the stars, reached the sky, and found the glass ceiling. Some researchers say, I couldn't be happier, like it's possible to prove that 50% of our happiness is determined by genetics. Where do they get these numbers from? Like we shouldn't try to be any happier than we currently are. Like happiness is a matter of percentage points and surveys, and it's not. I say I couldn't be happier because I don't see the point of quantifying joy. Was I happier yesterday than I am today? Would she have been happier in my position than I am? Would I have been happier if I'd picked this instead of that? Happiness is not a competition. Not with yourself and certainly not with others. I say I couldn't be happier because if I were to place my happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, it would be something that ruins the fun of it. One of my favorite facts about happiness is that statistically speaking, if you were to ask any person on any street corner, in any village, in any town, in any city, in any country, on any continent on this planet, if you were to ask them, what do you want for your children or your hypothetical future children? Nearly every single one would tell you, I just want them to be happy. I think that's kind of amazing. I think it's kind of amazing that with all the perceived differences that we have between people, differences in priorities and values, this is a shared human concern, one of extremely few that we can find statistically. And so I think it's interesting that even though we know this, even though we can prove that this is something that we are all concerned with, that we all care about the next generation having what they need to just be happy, the word happiness doesn't pop up a lot in political and economic kind of environments. I'm a bit of a geek for reading economic reports, reading political party manifestos, but the word happy just doesn't pop up a lot. And I find that somewhere implicit, written between the lines of most of our influential documents, most of our influential speakers and people of this time, is this assumption. This assumption that somehow happiness is useless. Happiness is useless. Doesn't do anything, doesn't produce anything, doesn't consume anything by any measurement in which we evaluate our lives and our societies. Happiness is useless. It doesn't show up on any of our measurements, and yet it's one of few things worth trying to measure. Happiness is useless. It doesn't succeed at anything, doesn't achieve anything. There are no medals for it, no honorary speakers, no lifetime awards. You can't put it on your CV. Happiness is useless, and yet it's one of few things worth striving for. Happiness is useless. It will not improve your national economy, cannot shrink the deficit, will not protect you from climate change, cannot save you from the war. Happiness is useless, and yet it's one of few things we could all statistically agree on. Happiness is useless, and yet it makes all the difference in the world. When we have it, our whole lives are coloured by it. when we lose it, or we struggle to find it, or we wonder if we ever had it at all, everything in our lives speaks of its absence. Happiness is useless. We can't put a price tag on it, can't sell it, can't instrumentalize it, can't corrupt it, can't manipulate it, can't use it for our own purposes. Happiness is useless. We can't use it for anything, except to create more happiness. Happiness is useless, and that is exactly why we need it so much. Now, if we were to take this fact seriously, this fact that, statistically speaking, what we want for our future children, or by extension for the next generation, is for them to have what they need to just be happy, if we were to take that seriously, that would have a couple of implications. Because this is a very scientific show, right? You saw the Venn diagram, a highly scientific show. I thought we'd do a thought experiment. What would happen if we took happiness seriously? The first thing that would happen is stick figures. We would need to recognize that happiness is political. And what I mean by that is that if we were to take this fact seriously on a larger level, on a societal level, it would have some pretty profound impacts for how we structure our political systems, our economies, for how we think about resources and who should have access to them. If we were to take happiness seriously, starting in this country, we would need to think about the different ways in which money can influence happiness. Because money can influence happiness, but not equally across all contexts, across all circumstances. When we have a base level of income, where we can put food on the table, a roof overhead, where we can send our children to school, where we can go about our lives without constantly worrying about how to make ends meet next week or next month, without being terrified of the prospect that we will lose our home if someone in our family falls ill, or we lose our jobs. Once we have a base level of income where we are not constantly worried about those things, more money statistically does not make us more happy. Statistically speaking, a second car will not make us more happy. A second house will not make us more happy. A bigger family holiday will not make us more happy. But money can matter for happiness, for the people below that line. When money is the difference between constantly worrying about how to make ends meet, when a broken boiler or a ripped school uniform can throw off the household economy for months, money makes a difference to happiness. When money means being able to provide your kids with things that you think everyone should have, being able to throw them a birthday party or give them a proper Christmas, money makes a difference for happiness. So if we were to take happiness seriously, we would need to take seriously how we distribute our resources. If we were to take happiness seriously in this country, we would need to take poverty seriously. If we were to take happiness seriously in this country, we would need to start by taking seriously the measurements that are forcing more and more people into poverty, making it harder and harder to get out, making it so that fewer and fewer people ever reach beyond that line. If we were to take happiness seriously in this country, we would need to start by opposing austerity. Give me a student, any student. Give me only one definition of success and only one way to make it. Give me academic excellence. Give me full-time extracurriculars. Give me part-time job to pay the bills. Give me internship, followed by internship, followed by internship, followed by internship. Give me a lifetime of debt. Then tell me I am worthless. Tell me my labor is not worth paying for. Tell me it's a favor to hire me for free. Go on. Tell me I am worthless. When in this country, millions of people compete for thousands of jobs, call it their own personal failure if they don't all get one. When the young and the old and the sick have no way into a labour market, ever contracting, ever decreasing, when you take money out of their opportunities for education and health, call it their fault. Call them lazy, call them benefit scroungers, call it a culture of dependency. Go on, tell us we are worthless. Say it's not political. Say it's just the way it is, that food banks can be cut, but big banks need to be bailed out. That the minimum wage can stagnate and benefits be chucked off entirely, but when the 1% made more off of the first year of the financial crisis than they had for the 30 years before. Call it austerity. Go on. Tell us we are worthless. Rebrand public failure into personal competition. Rebrand it filling your CV. Rebrand it increasing your skill sets. Rebrand it exposure and networking. As we volunteer and intern. Volunteer and intern, digging ourselves ever deeper into debt, ever deeper into despair. Go on. Tell us we are worthless. Tell me unemployment levels skyrocketing have nothing to do with it. Tell me being more likely to end up on the street than in a graduate job has nothing to do with it. Go on. Tell me we're all middle class now. Call call centre workers and shelf stackers, garbage handlers and cleaners. Call 1 out of 5 working for less than the minimum wage, which is less than the living wage. Just middle class in the making. Tell us we are worthless. Occupy my body as if it were some resource you could use to raise the GDP. Broken back from all the heavy lifting. Crumbling knees from all those hours. Standing, depression and stress from the worry. How will I pay rent this month? How will she support the kids? How will he pay the medical bills? Go on. Tell us we are worthless. Tell us the only thing not working about this system is us. You guys are amazing. You guys are just, I'm hoping this is making you happy because it's totally adding to my happiness. So thank you for that. So I uploaded that poem, a video of that poem onto YouTube about 6 months ago. And things went mad. I uploaded that poem onto YouTube and in the first 24 hours, 100,000 people had seen it. I don't know about you, but I don't have 100,000 friends. So I don't know how they all heard about it so quickly. But somehow they did. And the response was amazing. People were kind and supportive and they emailed me to tell me how that story related to their experiences or to share what hope that gave them. But there were also other kinds of reactions, some very extreme other kinds of reactions. This was a Wednesday and in the first 24 hours I had received 10 hate mails and death threats. I don't know about you, but on a normal Wednesday, I don't receive 10 hate mails and death threats. And so that was a bit of a challenge to my happiness. I guess you could call it that, a challenge to my happiness, 10 death threats. And I guess what I realized was that we don't control what happens to us. We are not empowered to predict that uploading a YouTube poem will lead to 10 death threats. And whatever kinds of challenges come our way in life, we are often not in control of the fact that they happen. But we are in control of how we respond. I could have chosen to respond to 10 death threats on a Wednesday by reading them all in great detail, wondering if they could get a hold of my address, could make any of those threats real, or going into great detailed discussions all night with internet trolls about the pros and cons of neoliberalism. Or I could get a bottle of wine, invite a couple of friends over, and read out the really funny of the ignorant comments in Ponzi voices. I don't know about you, I picked the latter. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes choosing to be resilient in the face of other people wanting to ruin our happiness, of other people wanting to throw hate our way, sometimes choosing to be resilient in our happiness is a political act. Symbolic backtrack. No one will notice that if I say it in that voice, right? Symbolic backtrack. If happiness is political, then that has implications on our national level. But if we took this fact of all of us caring that the next generation have what they need to be happy, if we took that seriously, that would have some larger implications as well. I mean, we're still in the thought experiment, so it's okay to think big, right? For example, we need to reform our entire economic system worldwide, a couple of the political systems as well. Something that we would need to start by doing is to think very differently about development. So development is a huge term and lots of things fall underneath it, but billions and billions and billions of pounds are spent every year on development projects. When those projects are spent on reducing poverty, money well spent on happiness. That is great. But when that money is spent on modelling poorer countries, on richer countries, with the assumption that that will make them happier, then we're a little bit misguided. Just like how people tend to assume that someone who is richer will necessarily have a better life or be happier than someone who's poorer, which isn't necessarily true. People tend to assume that countries that are richer have happier inhabitants than countries that are poorer, which absolutely isn't true. In fact, there's almost no correlation there at all. Very often, the closest correlation that we have when we look at that kind of scale is inequality. Not how much wealth people have, but how that wealth is distributed, who has access to that wealth, what that wealth creates for people. And so we end up with situations where we have countries like Bhutan, incredibly poor, small country, where people are relatively equally poor, that scores infinitely higher on happiness reports self-reported happiness than countries like Britain, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but also a highly unequal country. Because in highly unequal countries, we end up with situations where the very rich tend to be less happier than they could be because they're constantly afraid that someone will take away what they have, because they're aware of what others don't have, because it tends to mean that they are afraid that someone will take from them what they have by violent means, by criminal means, or by political means. And it tends to make them less happy than they could be. And the less rich, the very poor included, tend to be less happy than they could be because they're aware of what they don't have access to, of what other children have, but their children are being deprived of the doors that are closed in their faces, and that naturally tends to make them less happy than they could be. So I think there's an arrogance. I think there's an arrogance to assuming that if we're richer than someone else, it means that we're happier than them. And there's a similar arrogance to assuming that if our country is richer than someone else's, it necessarily means that the people in it are happier. And I think that arrogance is pretty similar to deciding to name your country Great Britain. I'm great. I'm great, and I know I must be great because I said I was, and I'm great. I'm the best. I know I must be the best because I said I was, and I'm great. I'm developed. I know I must be developed because I said I was, and I'm great. And I'm great. And I'm developed, and you're not developed. Because your people don't have reality TV, or fast food, or landfills, and they're great. They're great, and I know they must be great because I have them, and I'm great. I'm great, and I'm developed, and you're not developed. Because your people only have what they need instead of every product they've ever been told they should buy, am I right? And you're not developed because your people grow their own food instead of buying it pre-packaged at supermarkets. And you're not developed because your people have community instead of Facebook friends. And that's not great. That's not great, and I know that's not great because I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that because I developed past it. Or I lost it. Or I'm not sure. But I'm sure it's not great because I'm not like that, and I'm great. And I'm great. And I'm great, and you're not because you're different. And I'm the best, and you're not because you're different. And I'm developed, and you're not because you're weird. So you can be underdeveloped, and I'll be developed. And you should listen to me for how to develop right, because I'm great. Because I'm great, and I know I must be great, because someone great said I was. It was me. I always love doing that poem. I wonder what will happen when UKIP gets like a smell of me. It's going to be bad. These immigrants talking about how Britain isn't great anymore. Oh God. Anyway, we'll stay away from that. No more YouTube poems, ever, ever. One of my favourite facts about happiness is that when top UK researchers on happiness were asked to compile all the different findings that they'd found and try to combine it into a few tips that were found to be true across the board, across their research. One of the top tips that they gave was to be part of something greater than yourself. It's kind of unclear what that means. It can mean being part of a particular place, or a particular faith, a particular hobby, a particular community. What matters about being part of something greater than yourselves is that the story of our happiness is part of a bigger story. So that even if right now in our story it's pretty difficult, the story that we are part of writing together can be one of positive change, can be one of social transformation, can be one of working towards something worth fighting for. And I guess something that I've found when thinking about the fact that happiness is political is if happiness is political, that has implications for how we might plan and think about our happiness on the other levels. Symbolic backtrack. Smooth, right? Also, I mean, I don't know if any of you can see this because you're a little bit farther away, but I had lots of fun making these. So the happiness is social sign has someone offering someone tea, right? But the happiness is political sign is someone demanding tea at a demonstration. I thought that was, I don't know what I thought about that, but I don't think so anymore. So this whole being part of something greater than yourself, it can look like all kinds of things, but it looks like recognizing that it can be a political act to think of happiness as something bigger than yourself. For me, being a part of something greater than myself has looked like organising for social justice. It's looked like placing my struggles, my personal struggles, in a bigger context, and in a context where there are things that need to be changed on a broader level. And it's kind of helped me deal with my personal stuff. For anyone who can recognise that feeling, this is for you. Teach me how to be an ally to your struggle. Teach me how to be strong for the both of us when I am beat down and bloodied, when newspaper articles and election results have pushed my heart deep underground, frozen for winter, not to thaw until a new kind of Arab spring springs from all that is broken about this world, when I feel hopeless and lost, when I give in and give up. Hand me something to fight with that doesn't involve throwing rocks. Give me something to fight for that doesn't include hating those who fight against. Don't let me be a them to your battle. Instead, sit me down. Tell me your stories. Sing me your struggle songs, and I will do the same for you. In a world of political promises as hollow as bones, it is easy to train fists before training arguments. In a world of paper manifestos, it is not hard to burn too bright for due process. In a system this flammable, it is not strange that some of us would rather start the fire than build futures if we still have to watch them burn. So teach me how to be an ally to your struggle. I'm a good listener. I can make decent coffee for political meetings, and I can hold hands as well as I can hold placards. So sit me down and let's talk. Let's talk like it matters, because it does. Because it's one of few things that always does count. This figuring out how to live together thing. This figuring out how to live with ourselves thing. Teach me how to be an ally to your struggle, because I cannot live happily alone in this war zone of an economic climate. Because I need to think that we're at least trying to live happily ever after together. So let's talk. Let's talk, you and I. Let's talk and let's figure out how. Teach me how to be an ally to your struggle. One of the other facts about happiness that has really intrigued me, because I think it's wrong, is that statistically, people who self-report as being happier or quite happy on a scale of 1 to 10, they also tend to be friendlier, more generous, and more interested in other people than people who score lower. I think that's wrong, because I think it's the other way around. I think that when we're friendlier, more generous, and more interested in other people, we become happier, because we recognize that happiness is social, because we recognize that our happiness is intertwined with other people's, that we don't live in some tiny little bubble. Very often, the research on happiness tends to start from this weird theoretical perspective of this bounded individual that somehow is completely unconnected from other people, that exists in complete solitude, that somehow has their happiness completely unaffected by their family or their friends or their co-workers. If you've ever had family or friends or co-workers, you will know that that is not how it works. If someone has a really shit day, and they come in complaining to you and they think everything about the world is crap, that is going to affect your day. And if someone has a really good day, a really hopeful day, a really caring day, a really joyful day, that is also going to seep into your life. And so I think very often, recognizing that happiness is political looks like recognizing that the ways in which we form personal bonds with others, the way that we make up our daily happiness, is political as well. Symbolic backtrack. And I know that in theory. I know in theory that just like we need to be able to ask for help, we also need to be able to give it. If it's a basic human right to be able to ask for help, to draw up on our support networks, it's a basic human privilege to be able to offer it to people we care about. And just like we need to be loved, and we need to have people there for us when it's a rough time for us, we need to be needed. We need other people to need us to be there for them when they're having a rough time. And I know that in theory. But in practice, I don't usually feel particularly grateful when someone asks me for help, because it means they're having a rough time. Because it means that they're going through something so big that they can't cope with it on their own. And as much as I can feel grateful looking back, I didn't feel particularly happy that time my dad broke his neck. He's fine, he's okay. But it wasn't the best of days. And it wasn't particularly happiness I felt at being able to be there for him in the hospital. That time my dad nearly died, I learned something important. I learned that I'm a bitch to people who nearly die. He tore his hamstring and broke his neck trying to break some cycling record, and it nearly broke me. Yet when I saw him in the hospital, he just smiled. Said he was so happy to be alive and just to see me again. Maybe it was the morphine, but maybe it was the fact that he's a cyclist. He believes in aching muscles, loves a long road ahead, and trusts the power of the journey. Then again, it was probably the morphine, but he just smiled. Said he was so grateful things hadn't gone worse. I didn't feel the same. He said this, mind, wearing a neck brace covered in multicolored bruises, but he looked so happy. I didn't feel the same. My dad may be the long-distance triathlete, but I've lived far too far from him for far too long to ignore what distance feels like. So instead of listening to his stories of realizations and the learning curve, how hard times teach us how loved we really are, instead of calm and quiet and contemplation over the road travelled instead, I climbed onto his hospital bed, put my heavy head against his struggling lungs and told him that if he ever dies, I would kill him. If he didn't wear a helmet, or he pushed himself too far, or he just got too old or too sick, that was not a good enough excuse. My dad was back on his bike within months. But he promised me he's never falling off again, without letting me catch him. Our symbolic backtrack has led us to the beginning, which means we're at the end. Which also means that you've had exactly 1 hour to think about if there's anything in your life that you could change to maybe add to your happiness in some way. You've had an hour to think about your joys, your good times and your bad. If there's something that you've come up with in this hour that you think would add to your well-being, would add to your happiness, I give you permission. I think it's a pretty good idea. You deserve to be happy. If you want to, tell me on the way out what it was. I'd love to hear it. Or come up and chat to me anyway. I'm going to do one last poem, but before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about how the Edinburgh Student Arts Festival works. So it's a fantastic initiative, mostly run by volunteers who have done an absolutely incredible job. When you walk out today, there'll be someone standing there with a bucket. Today is free, and you should absolutely be able to come even if you don't have a penny to your name. Art should be accessible to everyone. But if you do have a penny to your name, or even a couple, feel free to donate them on the way out. The proceeds go to making sure that there can be another festival next year, they can put on even more fantastic events, and that I can keep doing this, that I can, eat and pay rent and live, which is handy for happiness. And if you feel like supporting me a little bit more, I'll be at the top of the stairs on your way out. And I left them in the back. I have some books and some CDs as well with me that I've self-published. It also features beautiful music by a local band called Beluga that have put together beautiful tunes to some of my poems. So if you want to come up and chat to me, tell me what it is you're going to change, or tell me the show was crap if you want, or whatever else you'd like, I'll be up there at the end. But before we properly finish, I promised you one piece of advice at the end of the show. You ready? Make art. I told you at the start, stick figures. It doesn't matter how crap it is. It doesn't matter if you don't show it to anyone. Making art, statistically, measurably, makes you happier. You can actually make really crap stick figures. You can make a beautiful symphony, or you can make a 1 hour poetry show. It is statistically likely to add to your happiness. So is coming to an arts event, by the way. So thank yourself for doing that. I hope it's added in some way to something. When we make art, we are for a moment enveloped in creating, where we're not worrying about the past, we're not planning for the future, we just are. The measurements that we can make of what effect it has to create art is that it helps us through the difficult times, and it makes us enjoy the good times more. And part of it is because it functions as a sort of meditation. But part of why it functions so well is that when we make art about the difficult times, about the things that are hard for us, about the things that we are frustrated with and angry with in the world, it makes us more able to cope with those things. It makes us more able to change those things, and that makes us happier. And when we make art about the things that we feel good about in our lives, the things that we are grateful for, the things that we are joyful about, the things that we are hopeful about in the world, it makes us more able to notice those things. It makes us more able to appreciate those things, and that makes us happier too. So it doesn't matter what kind of art you make, It genuinely doesn't matter if you think it's crap. It still adds as much to your happiness. It doesn't matter if you don't show it to anyone. Making art is still incredibly likely to add to your happiness. So if I were to give you one piece of advice, it would be to make art. The beautiful thing about happiness being personal is that when you do something like make art, which makes you happier, that can have a fundamental impact on you, both in the short and long term. The beautiful thing about happiness being social is that when you become happier, the people around you become happier. And the people around them become happier, and the people around them become happier. And the beautiful thing about happiness being political is that when the people around you become happy now, the world becomes a slightly better place. So make art. I think it can change the world. I've never been much for art's sake. If it doesn't do anything to us, why do we spend so much time doing it? I want poetry like first touch. Poetry that kisses me so deeply, metaphors linger on my tongue. I want poetry that claws at my heartstrings, opens up my chest and lets itself in. I want poetry that fucks me senseless. Poetry that gives me morning after hair, the day after a really good poem. I like to walk home in the morning light, still dressed from last night, shoes in hand, smiling uncontrollably, just thinking about the best bits of last night's poem. I've never been much for art's sake. If it doesn't do anything for us, why do we spend so much time doing it? I want poetry to be the soundtrack to my life. Poetry to plug my headphones into. Poetry to laugh and dance and cry and fucking meditate to. I want poems strong enough and versatile enough to listen to on repeat like a heartbeat. I've never been much for art's sake. If it doesn't change any part of us, why do we spend so much time changing it? I need poems. Poems like rescue boats and electric blankets. Poems that calm my mind and kickstart my heart most of all. Most of all, I need poems like anthems, poems like manifestos and marches, poems that are both our weapons and our shields, poems that build in us, that can keep fighting, to ask real questions, and demand real responsibility, poetry that builds a real community of us worth fighting for. I've never been much for art's sake. I want poetry that changes my life and rocks my world, and I want all of you to go home today and write it. Thank you so much for coming. A huge thank you to the Edinburgh Student Arts Festival, to the venue for putting on this fantastic series of events. A huge round of applause for the techies up in the back that make this actually possible. And a round of applause to yourself for coming. I'll see you upstairs.